Just want to thank you guys for coming out today. I know there's probably, I think there's 4 biostimulant talks, so you'll be biostimulanted out by the end of the day tomorrow. Hopefully you'll learn something here today. On the handout, I wanted to point out the last sentence says, maximize inputs such as wetting agent, fertilizers, and pesticides. I wrote this kind of before I finished the lit review, so we can sum up the pesticide work right now. There's not a lot of pesticide work in turf done with biostimulants. There's some work done in South Carolina and North Carolina, in the US on Trinaxpac ethyl, which is a plant growth regulator, and some work done on propiconazole, which is a plant growth regulator / fungicide. And I don't think you have use of those in this country, so that goes out the window. Fertilizers, we can get into that a little later, but the pesticide work in the scientific literature really is minimal and really not applicable to your environment anyway. So, a little bit about myself. Got my PhD in environmental science from the University of Rhode Island in the United States on working on POA annua, so anthracnose control and annual bluegrass weevil control, which are kind of in the US centered in the northeast part of the country where most of the golf courses are that are very high end. So golf pretty much started in the northeast part of the United States. Got a master's in plant science, and I worked on using fungus to kill grubs, which I think, I don't want to get into that here because that's a whole topic, but I think Aquatrols will have some opportunities for grub control, potentially using biological agents in the future. So that kind of gets me excited to using some of that master's work in that area. Been at Aquatrols for 14 months. Before that, I was at Scott's Miracle Grow. And I'm really excited to be at Aquatrols. And I actually love golf, so I haven't golfed much over here a lot. So we played a little bit, Casey and I, down near Liverpool. Amazing country. The golf is absolutely fantastic. I would say better than the US. Not too many Americans in here, right? Just Casey. So yeah, so today we're going to talk about biostimulant use on turfgrass. So this presentation is focused primarily on the literature you have on turfgrass with biostimulants, excluding things like greenhouse, agriculture, ornamentals, horticulture, because much of the research actually was done in those environments, right? And we kind of extrapolate to this environment that we work in, but I would say they're quite different. So some of the expectations that you have in those other fields can't be realized in turfgrass because you're working in an entirely new system. So this presentation is primarily focused, again, on turfgrass use found in scientific literature, wherever it's done in the world. Surprisingly, you would think there's tons of work out there on that, but we can talk a little about that. I'll give you an introduction to biostimulants, which you're probably, again, you probably know most of the stuff. You guys probably use the products. You're probably going to hear about it later on today. You heard about it before. But I think having a good grounding in kind of the confusion around biostimulants is important because sometimes myself, I've been doing this for a while, I still get confused. So if you guys are confused, don't feel bad. I feel like everybody's confused, including a lot of the scientific community. So we'll go over the benefits. What I find kind of interesting, and I didn't know anything about, was how these things are made. And I don't know if you guys know much about that, but I threw it in here just because it's kind of cool to know where they're coming from and what the sources are and how some of these things get to your golf course. Again, we'll go over the evidence in turfgrass for and against biostimulants, and then I think probably the most important part is I have a couple of tips that came out of literature on how you could potentially maximize the use of these products. For some of them, there are no tips, right? So not enough work has been done, so I can't really provide you with ways to use it other than what the industry partners would say. And then we'll talk a little about our research. We launched, I think, we've had a seaweed product in the past. That's gone away, but we've launched another product, Zipline, you probably heard of. I have a couple of slides in here. It's talking about that and what you can expect from that and how we kind of came up with that. Like, what was our thought process for developing that product? So, I love this slide. Like, you see this, and you're like, what the hell? It's just a lot of stuff going on, right? So you have extracts, acids, microbials, and in those groups, you have this other stuff, and I mean, what do you use? Purdue University, one of the biggest, I think, turf programs in the country, United States, people came to them and said, you know, these are the biggest questions we have. What are these things? What do they do? Where do they come from all of a sudden? I think the most important one is, do they really work? And then how do they fit into the kind of things I'm doing? Agricin, It's a company that we have a partnership with in the United States. They kind of, I would say, are the experts in processing of some of these microbials. And they built this on consumer research, and it was, again, republished by CropLife, but it kind of, I think, illustrates very well what some of the confusion is about, right? How do these things work? It's pretty actually daunting to look at this as, I think, a grower and try to figure out what to buy. And quite frankly, I'm an industry guy, and there's a lot of stuff out there that there's no data to support any of it. We try really hard to find data to support some of it, but it's a lot of stuff that you have to kind of sort out in a complex turfgrass environment. So, again, not just you guys, not just me. These are the experts in the United States. So I'll stand back. If I can stand here and just read a couple of them, I'll stand back so you can see. So the first one I think is kind of interesting. The biggest issue facing the biostimulant world today is an accurate description of what constitutes a biostimulant. This guy is a marketer for biostimulants, and he has no idea what makes up a biostimulant. I think the last one is pretty awesome as well. There's confusion in the marketplace among retailers and growers as to what biostimulants are and what benefits they provide. Biostimulants need to be more clearly defined from a regulatory and agronomic standpoint, so retailers and growers, you guys, know what products to use and what results to expect. We work at Aquatrols with a couple of these companies. You go talk to them, and they can provide good data on the products they sell. And it's really interesting because Jane Fife, for example, awesome lady, PhD, teaching in one of the best schools in the country, and she's like, we just need a good definition, right? Even from all the work done in ag, they can still come up with a good definition. That definition, not having one, affects the regulatory status. In the United States, biostimulants are somewhere between fertilizers, I would say, and soil amendments, so they're handled on the state level, if at all. The EPA is trying to wrangle what all that stuff is, we saw on the last slide, but again, it's difficult for them, and I think you have a similar problem over here. It's caught in kind of a no man's land in terms of regulatory. And the first step really is defining what they are. The Farm Bill, United States, passed last year, and for the first time, there is a definition of what a biostimulant is in there, but I think it's going to evolve probably in the next couple of years. So, if you look back at the history of papers outside of turf, everyone has sort of their own definition of what a biostimulant is, right? So, you see some good stuff in here. Stimulates life, for example. No, it's not a fertilizer. Promotes plant growth. This one is especially nerdy. I'll read that one because I was like, really? So products mostly based on natural raw materials used in ultra small amounts for the modification of physiological and biochemical and plant processes that lead to the realization of genetic, productive, blah, blah, blah. I mean, if you guys read that, it's hard to understand, right? And this is in the literature outside of our space. So again, people have been working on it for a long time. This is kind of the best definition from a decade of reviews. And it's also, again, adding to the high level of confusion. If you look at this material in a separate way, you can see in the 50s, primarily fatty acids and some pheromones, some hormones, excuse me. And as it evolves, we kind of get to where we are today. But you can see a lot of work has been put in the ag world to kind of come up with what we have today. I think this is actually a really good slide to illustrate just how complex, you go from microorganisms, vegetable oils, seaweed extracts, to kind of, I think, a good understanding within the last 4 or 5 years. So from 1951 to the last 4 or 5 years, we finally established, I think, a good set of pillars for what these things are. Looking at the scientific research, not much happening. And then the last 6 years, somebody must have got grant money because it kind of took off. And just in this period, you have a few hundred papers being published. Just stunning. And so that's why, even though there's this confusion, there's a reason why, right? Science hasn't done too much. And all of a sudden, we're still trying to understand. So it'll probably take another 10, 15 years for the community to kind of figure out what these things do exactly, what rates should look like, what's the best environments for them to get good efficacy. So just want to show you most of the papers here are in ag sciences. Of these, I would say, do an extensive search in the last 2 months. there's probably 25 to 30 really good turfgrass papers. So of the 500, a very small amount is related to the work we do. So all that stuff compressed together, the history of biostimulants, kind of the confusion, looking at all of the different definitions. I think we at Aquatrols came up with what we think a biostimulant is. Naturally derived compounds to stimulate or accelerate plant growth when applied at low rates, especially under plant stress conditions. That may include pheromones, microbes, humic substances, seaweeds, metabolites, but are not fertilizers, nutrients, or pesticides. I think the two key things here are the one in purple. The low rates may be adding to the inconsistencies in efficacy, so I think that still needs to be sorted out. I think we need to start thinking about those rates, not so much from a growth perspective, but potentially a toxicological perspective, right? So you build these models in toxicology to predict what the rates will do in plants. I think we'd apply that same kind of thinking to stimulating plant growth. We come up with a better idea of what these rates are. Personally, I think get rid of low rates. I think higher rates, unless it's stimulating the production of a toxic entity in the soil, are probably where you want to be at, but the research still needs to say that. That's just my own personal belief. And then the other thing you need to realize is that these things, and I'll say this during this talk, like I'll beat it into you guys, you won't see a good effect unless the plant is under stress, right? If you have good nutrients, good moisture, microbes are healthy, you apply these things, you probably won't see an effect. But you apply them as part of a program for when it does get stressful. So it's very preventative in that respect, right? So just understand you may be putting stuff down now and not see any effect, but when conditions are dry, for example, you're really going to see, I think, a good effect. So just keep in mind that this is probably the most important thing you can take away from biostimulants or this talk today, is that they work better under stressed conditions. So thinking about it all together, so they should, from the literature, affect water use efficiency, better root mass, assimilate nutrients better. I would say maybe on the disease tolerance. We'll talk about it a little later. Most of the research doesn't suggest disease tolerance in turf. Some people would say, anecdotally, I see this if I use it after several years. Yeah, probably. But you also have to think anecdotally is not really science, right? It's like you're seeing this thing. Is there a control set up somewhere else? Are the parts broken down so we can analyze those as well? Probably not. So I would say disease tolerance, yet to be determined. Induced acceptance, yes. And stress tolerance, for sure, under stressful conditions. So just a quick look at, I think, why you're seeing all these products in the marketplace. The compounded annual growth is, above 10%, which is for a business guy. You're like, yeah, there's an opportunity there. In your space in Europe, you're very limited in terms of control products, and if you can get some strengthened plants, yeah, that kind of makes sense. You can see why Europe is the biggest, and you can kind of understand why, these 5 things, seaweeds, humic substances, microbial amendments, are leading the pack. I mean, seaweed has been around forever. People were grinding it up, pelletizing it, putting it in their soil, so it kind of makes sense why you see these many products, because it's a good growth opportunity for business. You guys have limited stuff, so that's why it's growing so well over here, and historically, the things on that list correspond to here. You can see why those are the ones that people sell the most of. So I'll ask you guys a question, and you could say, you can't read from back there, but if you look at this table, right, a lot's been worked out again, so you can tell you what for example, humic acids activate plasma membrane, physiological function is growth of roots, higher crop yield, right? Protein hydrosylate from enzyme production, flavonoids, higher crop yield. So can anybody tell me what's kind of interesting about that? I'll give you 3 seconds, so I don't have a lot of time. 1, 2. So if you look at the plant species, corn, brassica, winter wheat, no turf grass, right? And we're trying to say that all this stuff relates to what we do. It's a little ridiculous. Again, the talk will focus on what these things do, how they're made, and how they can help you. So before we get into kind of the meat of the presentation, this is where we want to kind of keep microbes, for example, right? If you go on a golf course, USGA, UK spec green, take a sample, go to an agricultural field, take a sample. That agricultural field has 10 times more microbes than you would get in a golf course environment. The microbes are a key component of biostimulants, right, to help break things down. Actually, microbes are biostimulants, right? They make nutrients available to the plants. So we're trying to say that research on ag relates to this environment, where the microbes, which are key, are way less. We create this environment that's easy to have water repellency. You need moisture to have microbes, right? So another example of why we cannot rely, I think, on non-turfgrass research to make predictions about biostimulant effects in your environment. And we partially kind of created this environment, right? Because it's conducive to the growth of the plant that we want. So how do we keep this moist? How do we keep it healthy for microbes? We'll talk a little bit about that upcoming slides. Okay. All right, so I think probably the most, quote-unquote, popular set of biostimulants are humic and fulvic acids. So we'll have this slide kind of through the whole rest of the talk. We'll have this slide first, followed by how these things are made, and then how they can help you. So really just kind of gloss over that. I think the most important thing for humic and fulvics is nutrient availability, metal chelation. So if you look at the size of these molecules, fulvic acids are pretty small. Humic acids are much bigger. So humic acids are never going to go into the plant, right? They help create structure in the soil, but they're never going to go into the plant, right? They help bind molecules, so that's why they're chelating agents. Chelating agents bind molecules that get broken down by microbes. However, fulvic acids are small enough to be able to go into the plant, and they really are the drivers of taking some of the nutrients that have been chelated into the plant. Right? I think most people don't understand that you say, I'm going to put humic acid down to make my plant stronger. Not really. It's going to make your soil better, right? So if you want to make your plant better, fulvic acid is really the one you want to use. How are these things made? So two different ways. Leonardite is pretty much, how do I explain it? Compressed peat into coal after thousands of years, right? It's like a rock. That could be a starting material, but any organic matter over time really can provide you with a humic substance, right? So there's a process through oxidation where you just chemical process, the rock, hydrochloric acid, several filtrations, and you get humic and fulvic substances. So it's really breaking it down through a chemical process. This process, I think, is a little more interesting, and our partners do work on this process. So here you have a group of microbes that you get from potentially compost, right? You feed those guys this leonardite. The ones survive on the leonardite, reproduce, right? You get, everybody else is dead, but they also produce metabolites, right? So they're breaking down this leonardite into humic and fulvic, but they almost produce metabolites that you could harvest at towards the end of the process. So you're not getting just the elements, right? You're getting the carbon, the hydrogen, you're getting all that stuff, but you're also getting this group of metabolites that these selective microbes will code for, and those can feed your plants as well. So if you think you have this metabolites that are small molecules, you can optimize this to produce a little more fulvic substance. You have something that will help you carry those small molecules into the plant, right? And that's how we think about it at Aquatrols. So step back for a second. So in the red, I have outlined, again, stress tolerance, right? Again, under normal conditions, you're not going to see the effects of some of these products, but when you have stress, you're going to see the effect of these products. Enzymes are produced that break down free radical oxygen molecules that build up during any biological process. So providing the plant with these substances will help you control some of those free radicals. You have another antioxidant produced because of these molecules. So limited effect on chlorophyll content, root length, shoot length, pea uptake, and salt tolerance. I'd say humic and fulvic is good for drought tolerance, not so much salt tolerance, right? Tips for use here is if you mix in granular humates, this work is done at, I think, the old course. You mix in granular humates, you get an effect in the root zone, increasing root mass. This one is sort of interesting because we do sell a foliar, our new product Zipline is a foliar applied humic substance blend with micronutrients. And I would say that that is actually right. You apply it in the first 2 months, you won't see anything. But you keep doing it, which is what our data says, you're going to see an effect. Humic acids may have limited growth on promoting effects if plants are adequately taken care of. So again, right nutrients, right fertilizer, right moisture, you're not going to see a big effect of humic acids. But again, like I'll say again through this talk, you want to prep for when it stops raining, right? So I have 3 slides. I'm not going to sell anything. I have 3 slides to show you guys how we think. So if you're a surfactant company and you make a product for stressful conditions that keeps moisture in the ground, right? And you have a product here that will give you these metabolites, will give you the fulvic acid to bring the metabolites into the plant, and it also helps you out in the stressful conditions. You kind of want to marry those 2 things and see what happens, right? And that was our thinking in Zipline. It's really our best surfactant, I think, with probably the best fulvic acid, humic acid, metabolite mixture on the market. So again, this product is made for regular program application, and when you have stressful conditions, you'll really see the benefit of it. The most important part here is like this part. So in the soil, you have nutrients. Obviously, microbes are breaking out those nutrients, and then the plant will pick up those nutrients, right? Without the fulvic acid, you don't have many vehicles to get those nutrients into the plant. We provide you with that, right? You don't have to wait for the process of microbes breaking down nutrients for the get into the plant. We're going to give you the thing with the nutrients and the fulvic acid already in the jug. So quicker acting, we hope, and we show that in some rooting data. It'll help you under drought conditions. So again, I think the most important thing that I think is improved stress tolerance and turf quality. Here's some rooting data. So again, repeated applications, you do see an increase in root mass. And again, most important thing is under drying conditions, you really begin to see the effect of mating a world-class surfactant with world-class, I think, humic substances. So that's my only product pitch, is that this is how we thought of this problem and how we thought we would resolve it. So if you're using Zipline, we'd love to hear, I think, after sales guys, how it's going, and let us know if you're happy with it. So probably the most popular of the group, seaweed extracts. Again, membrane stability, water availability. This one is probably key, stomatal regulation. That happens primarily under drought conditions. So what you get with the seaweed is, seaweed, probably shouldn't say, it's a plant generally, but it's a non-vascular plant characterized as an algae. So you still get a lot of the same chemical properties of a plant, right, in something that grows really fast, that's found ubiquitous all over the world. So you get auxins, you get cytokines, gibberellins. The abscisic acid is the one that controls stomatal regulation of the drought conditions. And a ton of research actually has been done on different sorts of kelp. What did they do to your plant? And I can share this deck with you afterwards if you want to go through it more in depthly, but there's a ton of research done on seaweed extract. It's made all kinds of ways, right? So according to literature, if you want to get phytohormones, those hormones, we just talked about auxins, gibberellic acid, if you want to get those things, you do a water-based processing. Cold pressed, haven't figured out what comes out of it. Enzyme assisted, you get antioxidants. Microwave assisted, you get some sugars, some complex polysaccharides. So when you're looking at, when you buy this stuff, if you want to be, say you need phytohormones, ask about what the processing was, right? Because that can really narrow down some of the effects that you could get. So not only ask for some data, but ask for what the processing was. So again, little work done to turfgrass. You can see in tall fescue, extracts increase root mass, foliar content, again, with tocopherols, which are antioxidants. All right, so some of the tips. So again, increased root mass, again, stress tolerance, NPK and leaf tissue growth, leaf growth, increased chlorophyll content. I think a lot of people are saying they put down seaweed extract, and it's the same as putting down NPK or micronutrients. Most of the papers clearly say, do not make this mistake. Keep your turf well fertilized. This, again, is an addition to that for when things get a little stressful. Tips for use: good as a root zone mix, good as a foliar application, awesome partner of all the stuff in here. This is the best partner for mixing with nutrients. And start early applications, keep doing it bi-weekly. And I'm sure everybody probably in this room is using seaweed extract. Protein hydrosylate. So this comes from two sources, animal-based and vegetable-based. Primarily, you go to a farm, they have leftover hay, they have chicken manure, they have leather, they have fish meal. That's kind of stuff just kind of processed. So you get amino acids, you get peptides. So I think most of it is chemical processing. You get, again, amino acids. The important thing to get out here is root targets. So again, more metal chelation, more making availability of nutrients by binding to them. So two processes here. They both start with grinding. One has acid hydrolysis, HCl probably, and one is enzymatic processes through bacterial. And then you get, after several centrifugation and filtration, you get these guys. So let's take leather, for example, or let's take bean legumes. It's really just bound up proteins, right? And proteins are just amino acids, chains of amino acids. So what you're doing is breaking those amino acid chains into smaller, unfolded proteins, which are peptides, and then you cut those. So you have small peptides as well, and you have amino acids. Peptides are just small amino acid chains that provide nutritive value. Again, so two processes, pretty much breaking up proteins. So makes nutrients more recognizable with the plant. Again, drought and stress tolerance, same enzymes we saw before, SODs. What to look out for here is that if you have highly charged soil, a lot of these amino acids will get fixed to those, so you won't get really the effect. The peptides shouldn't. You can't really tell, I think, when you buy something if it's amino acids or peptides, but essentially it's probably a mix of those two things. So tips for use. So they're great chelators, right? So influence micronutrients. Function best as foliar applications. Again, if you're buying it, if you could ask about what the process was and how it was broken down and how big are the functional groups in there, how big are the proteins, the peptides, and amino acids. I think you want something that has less protein, right? So more processing. So, like I'll say again, ask how it was processed, ask for data, right? Have companies show you that these things really work. This is what I find to be the most interesting. You guys use this stuff, Kaidusen, at all? Super interesting, because you look at the literature, almost nothing about Kaidusen and turf. I think there's one paper, and it barely talked about it. But I think that this product is kind of cool. So, induces defense against pathogenesis. This is really key, that it binds to a wide range of cellular components, right? It binds to cell walls, it binds to plasma membranes. So, for example, if you want to get small molecules that could bind to Kaidusen into certain areas, plant walls, for example, this is actually probably a good product to use. How's it made? It's pretty much ground up seashells. Ground up crustaceous shells. So shrimp, crabs, lobsters, that kind of stuff. Again, two processes. One that's biological, using enzymes, and one that's HCl or sodium breakdown. In the end, you're grinding these things up, mixing them with acids or mixing them with bacterial enzymes, filtering them, and then taking out an acetyl group to get a very fine powder. So, again, literature said increase leaf count. Again, the same thing we're seeing over and over, better under stressful conditions. So there's very limited use in turf and almost no research done on it. So I can't tell you guys how to use it. You're dependent on the industry partner for now, but at Aquatrols, we're going to do some extensive research on this one. I think the benefits potentially could be great against disease and larger silicates in spaces outside of turfgrass are used to kill insects. So is there a size of this that you could mix with your top dressing that will give you an effect on grubs and give you an effect on crane flies? Potentially. You have nothing to use right now. So part of what we're going to do is find the right size. I think crane flies are terrible. They're feeding in the soil. Potentially, if they're feeding, they're going to take up some of this in their gut. What this does is it lyses their gut, spills. They bleed out pretty much from the gut. So I think if we find the right size, we can help you with that problem as well. So more to come on this one. Super interesting. Not many industry partners yet. Not much research, but look out for this one in the future. I'm not a good bettor, but I would bet on this one. Okay, inorganic compounds. So 5 main non-essential elements for plants. Of these, the one you see the most is probably silicon, so that's kind of where I focused on. We're not going to get into all of this stuff, but I think the primary thing about this one I would say is that it gets into your cell's wall, give you a little rigidity, right? And some circles suggest that rigidity would give you a little bit defense against hyphae of disease. I don't really see that in literature, but again, I think having strong cell walls under stressful conditions is important. So how is this made? Pretty much it's in a rock form. You heat it to remove the oxygen. You also remove the... Then you get back to this phase where it's cooling and you reapply oxygen, and essentially you get this slag, and that's ground into different sizes for all kinds of use. For you guys, again, heat and drought stress tolerance, defense against abiotic stress. This is important. Not efficacious against white grubs. I think most people think like, you're going to put some of this in your soil and grubs will eat it. Potentially, but I think you have probably, if I was, again, a betting person, I would say Kaidusen probably might offer you a little better efficacy than to put silicon in the ground and think you're going to get white grub control. So if somebody tells you this, don't buy it. Tips for use, both soil and foliar applications. Again, good mixed partner of nutrients. And there's slag silicates and there's potassium silicates. You want to get the potassium silicates. Better refined, smaller, much better than the slag. So keep that in mind. So probably the biggest group. I get asked, I think, the most questions since I've been doing turf research now for a long time about microbes and mycorrhizae. I think I'm not going to go through mycorrhizae. We all kind of get what that does, how it works. There's also some there's ecto-root fungi, such as trichoderma. I'm sure you guys know about those kinds of things too, because it's super ubiquitous. So what we at Aquatrols want to know is, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, how do these things survive in the soil? Can we enrich them? Can we help them in any way? That's kind of where our research is going. But again, you can see they do some of the similar stuff, right? Water availability, stomatal regulation, membrane stability, all kinds of forms. I think you're probably most familiar with endomycorrhizae that you can buy, gets in the roots, helps process nutrients, that kind of thing. So, making them. Mycorrhizae are primarily made, they grow them in a greenhouse, harvest them, chop them up, sell them to you. That's the simplest thing I could say. Bacteria, again, through a large-scale fermentation process, and then they harvest them and sell them to you. So, again, drought stress tolerance. The key for these, know your soil, right? Know if your soil can support microbe amendment. Meaning, know the moisture, know the pH, know what's in there. That's the probably most important thing. Spring or fall applications, when you have less UV, for any microbe. So, nematodes don't go in here, but if you're applying nematodes, right, for grub control, if you're applying mycorrhizae, if you're applying bacteria, don't do it in the hot sun. They won't live more than 2 hours, probably. So, morning time, afternoon time, make sure you get good water coverage. Not too much, you don't want to wash them away. Soil moisture has to be maintained. Obviously, don't want to have too much fungicide use. when you're putting these things down, and low salt input. Other than knowing your soil profile, this is the question that we want to answer at Aquatrols. Do these things survive, right? So before I get into that, I just want to debunk sort of a myth. So do these things control disease? This work was done by Fry, I believe, at NC State University. These, won't get into them, but they're competitive products potentially for us in the future, but they contain the entire suite of everything you've seen on the list, excluding Kaidusen, right? You look at disease control, dollar spot, which is an emerging disease over here. Some of them actually increase the dollar spot, and it's probably because they're feeding it nutrients in their formula. So again, if anybody tells you that my biostimulant controls disease, ask for data, because literature says it doesn't work. There's been some work to suggest that silicon would be good for controlling disease. You see some reduction in things like root rot, powdery mildew, gray leaf spot. Again, but that's not, I think, diseases that are affecting you on a daily basis. You look at NC State work again, says the higher you go, the more brown patch you get. So potentially these people to see a reduction didn't increase their dose to see a lack of a reduction. So again, biostimulants, I think the jury's still out on whether or not they control diseases. We're going to do some work on it because I think we believe that the right mix, under the right conditions, you'll probably see some effect. So we're going to continue some work on that in the next couple of years. And plus, it's an emerging problem. I think you're going to run out of actives here in the next 5-6 years. So we want to be able to offer you something that's clean, that potentially could be beneficial. And I think that's kind of the difference between Aquatrols and some other companies, that we try hard to give you products that we tested in the field to make sure they work under many conditions. So, takeaways. Know the needs of your plant and soil. Expect these things to be inconsistent, right? I think the key really is having a program. You can apply them and not see an effect for up to 2 months, but staying on that program is important. If you're committed to going this way, if you stay on the program, you'll see good effects, right? So if you're committed, keep up, don't stop. You're going to, when the conditions are right, you'll reap the benefits of a program approach to biostimulants. I kind of had to say this potentially because I'm a wetting agent company guy, but they really are good mixes for wetting agents. They want to do the same thing. So if your plant's under stress and we can control soil moisture for you, but we can also provide some nutritive value, I think these things are excellent partners for wetting agents. So if it's not our wetting agent, try to mix them with a wetting agent. Also ask the companies, hey, do these things kill my microbes in my soil? Right? Ask the right questions. Overall, we need more research. Can we control disease pressure with these things? We need to provide more consistent results, and we need to figure out how we can enhance the microbial population. Again, microbes are the key to the engine to most of this stuff working properly. So you really want to try to keep them as happy as possible. So I think I have 2 more slides looking at some of the work we've done this year. So the questions we had was, if we add biostimulants to our products, what are the effects on microbes, soil moisture, and plant health? Plant health is pretty, I think, easy to do. Soil moisture, we're a moisture company, so that's also very easy to do. But when it comes to the engine, I think, for assimilation of biostimulants into your soil and into your program, microbes are key. So we want to say, in the first year, how do biostimulants affect microbial populations in the root zone? Does anybody want to guess? Anybody? What would happen? Casey, what do you think? So this year, went up to SGRI, worked with Christian Spring and Dr. Mark Paulette at Cranfield University. I would say if you want somebody who I think is could be an emerging leader in the biostimulant microbial work in turfgrass over here, Dr. Paulette is that guy. So if you want to know, hey, what microbes are in my soil today? Give him a ring. For $600, he'll tell you exactly what's in that soil, down to the genus, which is pretty impressive. So we put these treatments out in a randomized complete block design at STRI, made those applications monthly and bi-monthly, took a sample of a control plot before to establish a baseline for the microbes, and then looked at whether or not we have any reduction or growth in microbial population. At Aquatrols, we thought some of these things might enhance microbial population. We actually put down Pseudomonas strains, so we have actual live microbes going down. We had Bacillus spores, and we had obviously several surfactants, and I think the most important kelp and humic acid in terms of biostimulants going down as well. So collected samples and then counted microbes for a field season to see what happens. So the results, and we actually got the results last week, so you're the first people to see this other than Aquatrol staff. Nothing happens to microbes. You're right. Nothing happens to microbes. Like, I would have sworn you put in live microbes into the ground, you'd see something, right? You'd see an effect of some kind. Nope. It turns out the most important thing for maintaining a microbe population is your soil, is your plant, the roots. Over time, if the roots die, microbes die. If the roots are strong, microbes survive. That really is the key. So some of the things I've shown you here will create a stronger root zone, right? So you may want to use some of these things to create that stronger root zone so you have a strong microbial population. Several other studies suggest the same thing. Over time, you cannot amend that microbial population. And you could add gallons of compost tea if you want and say, yeah, I'm doing something, but most of those guys are dead within a week, right? That population you have, you want to make sure they're happy and strong. And having strong, happy roots is the only way to have strong, happy microbes. Next steps, we're going to try to use humates to make the soil better to potentially make a happy place for the microbes. And the key, the holy grail, I think for us, is can we use these things to get disease control? So our research is going to be based on, I think, disease control and creating better soil habitat for microbes to survive. And I think that is exactly 44 minutes. So I have 2 minutes for questions. If you guys got any. Nobody has questions. Long night last night? That's fine. You can find me walking around. You can come to our booth if you have any more interest in learning more about what we're doing, and then just about this stuff in general. And if you need the deck, I can send that to you, no problem. Thank you.